Well, we are on the cusp of getting a brand new album from Hats Off Gentlemen, It's Adequate. And I guess you might be wondering, whether or not they live up to their reputation and their name on this one. Well, at the very least at this moment, I can confirm that they are indeed gentlemen, at the very least. The rest of it, well, you're going to have to watch the video and find out. So, put on your thinking caps. We're about to get historical. What I think and feel about that? Coming right up. Okay, welcome Prog Noggins. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dave. This is Bleeding Edge, the latest album review, and we're talking this time about Hats Off Gentlemen, It's Adequate, and their new album, The Uncertainty Principle. Now, this is due out on digital March 4th, which pretty much means today by the time you're watching this, and the CD and streaming versions are going to be available in May. So the way you're going to get to hear this between now and May to go buy the album. If you want to wait, well, you're getting a review well in advance of the date you can get it on streaming platforms, or if you're waiting for that physical thing, I don't think they'll be upset with you for buying physical media. So, as always, the primary musicians in the band are the duo of Malcolm Galloway on vocals, keyboards, guitar, synths, and programming, and of course Mark Gatland on bass, backing vocals, and some lead vocals, Chapman Stick, keyboards, synths, and guitars. Those two guys are doing an awful lot of work, and because I think they got bored, they decided they were going to also produce the album themselves. Because, why not? And in this day and age, it is amazing to me, and this album is just another in a series of albums that just absolutely amazes me, the quality that folks can put out without the benefit of a studio, without going to some high-cost studio and getting some high-cost producer involved. They did it themselves, and they made an album that sounds really, really good in terms of the production quality. The rest of it, well, let's talk about that for a little bit, actually. The brief summary of the album is what we've got here is a thematically conceptual album that has some narrative traits to it as well. You don't often see those things getting mixed quite in the way that they are here. And it's, in and of itself, it's a reflection on how a sense of certainty leads to comfort in life, but it also means that comfort can work against those who refuse to acknowledge any uncertainty because it feels uncomfortable. In other words, that overconfidence works against us. And, let's be honest, life is messy and sloppy, and things aren't quite as certain as we like to think they are, even though that idea of them being certain makes us feel pretty good. Sometimes we get in trouble because of that. And it illustrates these concepts through the lens of historical vignettes centering on concerns about the development of nuclear weapons around World War II and afterwards, and particularly around moments in the life of German theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg. Sounds like heady stuff, I know. And let's be honest, it is. But Malcolm does a really impressive job as lyricist in making it all quite accessible, really. It's not filled with too many five-syllable words, although there are a few here and there, I think. Honestly, in my world, if you're not learning something in the course of an album, whether it simply be a new vocabulary word or some new concepts, maybe it's not a prog album. So I think that just comes with the territory. And Malcolm, homie don't play. He takes it to the hilt. Overall, the sound of the album finds the band putting forth a slightly more aggressive effort in tone this time around than has been typical of them in the past. So let's see what all that makes in the final assessment. But before I start the breakdown, just a quick reminder, if you could, throw a like my way if you enjoy the review, and subscribe to the channel too, please. Keep up with the reviews, the interviews, and all the other prog fun I've got coming for you. Really would enjoy it if you could do that. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, just for a quick recap, I do review albums on 4 categories: intellectual, innovation, technical, and emotional. All of that on a scale of 1 to 5. And hey, depending on what's going on, I might also add in what I call an enjoyment modifier if I think the objective score kind of deviates a little bit from my own personal experience, trying to give you the most honest and accurate review that I can. So let's get started here. And of course, we start off with the intellectual. So in the bottom line, really, this is a thinking person's album from a thinking person's band. Intellectual is their stock and trade in Hogia. That's what I'm calling Hats Off Gentlemen. It's adequate from here on out, because I guarantee you if I try to say that too many more times, I am going to trip myself up. So Hogia have always been very oriented towards literature and history, and this album is no different this time around. It pulls together concepts of quantum physics and historical references, and musing on the long-term effects of overconfidence and avoidance of the uncomfortable unknown. That in and of itself is a mouthful, and I wrote that myself, I'm quite proud to say. Malcolm in no way, shape, or form shies away from atypical lyrical approaches or structures. He'll shift from conventional lyrical structures, that A, B kind of thing, into short story first-person prose, to something approaching, I guess, beat poetry. I'm not sure there. It's the best way I can think to categorize it at the moment. So he keeps it up. He keeps it changed up. He keeps it different from song to song. And that level of variety throughout the album prevents there being a sense of sameness and stagnation between the songs, while at the same time helping to maintain that high level of engagement with the listener of that conceptual through line that goes throughout. It's a bit of a juggling act, I would say, on his part to keep it that varied, and he does a great job with it, to be perfectly honest. And that's the nice thing, is at no point in time do you get a sense that the songs are just kind of falling into the same rhythm or the same patterns over and over and over again. Every song has its own distinct personality in terms of the lyrical approach, and oftentimes in terms of the style of music that's reflected. So honestly, really, really high-level stuff from a band that, let's be honest, long ago firmly established their reputation as intellectuals. So easy score of 5 right there. No doubt in my mind about that. All right, moving on to innovation. With these guys and bands like them, I find this one a little bit difficult to grade. With the number of bands in the prog world, really, Hogia are a bit difficult to categorize, as they tend to be, as Mark said, multi-genre. So there's almost always a continual sense of exploration and change that's just, part of their nature. Now, they acknowledge that their DNA does include some things that are very familiar to those that know the greats of the prog world. So there is that foundation that I think that is primarily there with Pink Floyd. But in listening, you're also going to pick up some influences from Genesis and Radiohead and Hogarth-era Marillion and the Alan Parsons Project even. And they also, believe it or not, which you may or may not know now, but might pick up more on this album, they lay claim to some roots in heavy metal, citing Iron Maiden in particular. Which does come across in their guitar work primarily, with some chugging riffs and some hard edge stuff that will get put out in this album. Now, overall, despite the added aggression and the added grit put into this work here, I wouldn't say it is a wild divergence from their previous work. If you're familiar with Hogia, I don't think this is something that's going to trip you up massively. Where you're left scratching your head thinking, what the heck are they doing here? Where did they go? No, but there definitely is that sharper edge, and again, that added aggression. But I don't think I would categorize this as them going massively far outside of their established boundaries or necessarily bringing something new to the genre that's never been heard before. And honestly, though, there's nothing wrong with that, because their established sound has a lot to recommend it. So they score a solid 3. They didn't fall back. They didn't gain ground. Maybe a tiny bit, but not enough for me to push it forth to a 4. So I'm giving it a 3 on that. Now, looking at technical. There's clearly a lot of time, thought, and effort that these two guys put into creating this music and this album, and really their music all the time. But it really does come across in the final product. The music isn't what I would call massively complex, and yet there are a lot of layers going on with these songs. There are, if they describe in the interview, a lot of tracks in a lot of these songs, but not always. At the same time, if the song calls for a more sparse arrangement or more restrained playing to communicate the message or underline the emotion of it, that's what they do. They do what the song seems in and of itself to demand. And that keen sense of focusing on doing what is necessary to support their songs does them credit. Rarely do you find them giving in to overindulgence or overproduction. Now, yes, note I did say rarely. There might be a small handful of moments here and there where things maybe get slightly over the top. But I'm going to be honest, those brief lapses are easily forgiven in light of the deft touch that they show throughout the whole of this album, both in their playing and in the production. These guys very clearly have the requisite chops that one would expect from a prog rock band. And the times they cut loose, their virtuosity is quite impressive, really. More than once, even for me, calling to mind, say, the likes of the Aristocrats during especially one of the instrumentals on the song, but also during their extended musical passages. You know, they don't go overboard, but they certainly let you know that they got some mad skills. Let's put it that way. So really nice, solid performances and really nice production on this one. I'm giving it a 4. Meanwhile, we move on to the emotional component. Now, I'm going to admit there's been a certain kind of repetitiveness to my scoring on this category throughout the reviews I've done so far this year. And I think I've said this before about another album. I've gone back and forth on the score for this album in terms of the emotional impact that I felt. Lots of deeply intellectual stuff happening with and a lot of cold science, we could say, happening as we talk about the lyrical content of the music. With so much of the album dealing with these high concept themes about social interactions and individual perceptions, along with the Cold War tensions. It's easy for one to think that maybe there is little to spark the emotions in response. Well, it turns out that's not actually quite the case here. There's a sense of melancholy and angst, I think, that is present throughout most of the album, but interspersed throughout, you know what? There are moments of urgency, such as the mid-song transition and everything changed, almost as if it's overtly emphasizing the song title itself. Then there's the doubt and disappointment of Copenhagen, which focuses on a conversation between Heisenberg and Niels Bohr that left both men with very different accounts of what happened. And then there's also that steadfast and measured defiance that I hear echoed in my favorite track and one of my songs of 2024. If you haven't looked at that video, go check it out. That one being one word that means the world, Arkhipov. Remember that the name comes in there in the parentheses of the individual the song is about. And I had to spell it phonetically to make sure I didn't screw it up. So there you go. And then all this wraps up with this really nice, gentle admonishment, this uplift at the end of the album for people to, try to work to find ways to be more comfortable with uncertainty. And that's expressed in the album closer, Living with Uncertainty. So there's definitely these emotional high points and these emotional touchstones, really, throughout the album. So while I wavered on this one a bit, I got to say, by the end, when I really look at it in whole and I think about how I felt during each of those songs, this album actually successfully affected me on that emotional level more than the others I've reviewed this year so far. So giving it a 4. This is hey, this is something different for Dave to do this year. They finally gave an album a score of 4 on the emotional part. So anyway, you take the scores, you do the basic math. You don't need to know quantum physics to get this average of 4 for the album. And in this case, I actually have no enjoyment modifier to apply. For me, the experience of this album actually matches what I put down on paper when it came time to reviewing it. So good solid 4 right there, and that definitely makes it one of the higher rated albums I've done this year, maybe tie for the highest. Standout songs on the album, of course, I've already sung the praises of One Word That Means the World. There's also the Think Tank with its chugging guitar riffs and what I find a very powerful and kind of punchy chorus, almost symphonic in some ways, although not really having a symphonic sound, but just, I don't know, there's a certain grandness to it that I really like, the way the stabbing chords of the keyboards and the guitar interplay in there. That really is cool for me. There's the instrumental virtuoso jam of the Ultraviolet Catastrophe. When I mentioned the Aristocrats, that's the song that absolutely had me thinking of them. There's some chops on display, of course. And then finally the closer, Living with Uncertainty, which has a really cool, funky groove in the first part of the song especially, that I really dug. And I thought was a nice way to wrap the album, because again, there's a little bit of doom and gloom that goes on in this album, and there's definitely angst, I think is a good word for it. I think it's hard to talk about Cold War tensions and Cold War times without thinking of words like that. So there it is. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? I'm very curious. Share them in the comments. And yes, knowing that I also just interviewed the guys for this album, it's not the first time I've spoken with them, so I know them a little bit. And again, the album's going to be out real soon. I know I open myself up to bias, to accusations of bias, I should say. That you might question whether or not I have reviewed this objectively and scoring it as highly as I did. I get that. I hear you. It's one of the reasons I hesitated for as long as I did before doing album reviews, because I was doing a lot of interviews. Well, okay. I can accept that. I can acknowledge that. And I'm just going to say, if you want to challenge my objectivity here, okay, fair enough. Just do me a favor and listen to the album first. At the very least, listen to the songs that have been released. And I don't remember exactly which ones have been released so far. It might only be, I think it was 2, Copenhagen and One Word That Means the World. I know have both out so far. So if that's all you're going to listen to for the time being and not buy the album, that's on you. But you at least have those available to you on any streaming service and video. There might be a third. I've lost track. But listen to the album first before you accuse me of losing my objectivity. I take that kind of thing and my integrity very seriously. So I try to do my best to honor those concepts when I'm talking about this album review. So that's all I have for you for now. As always, never fear to deviate from the norm. And until next time, keep it prog.